Make a shade with Windows by Melissa. First, make sure you know your measurements for your finished dimensions. Add 2 to the width and 3 to the length. You're going to double check that against your order to make sure that you're using the right measurements when you prep it on your main fabric. I like Frixion pens. They're heat erasable. I use my large T-square to measure out my fabric, making sure that I have measured and placed all my panels on the fabric before I start to cut. I cut my measurements out of my main curtain panel fabric first, making sure that my shades start at the same place to make sure they're identical. Once I've measured out my main fabric, then I start to work on my drapery. I make my sewing lines on my drapery, not on my main fabric. I mark them at 7/8 in from the side so that my curtain is a 1/4 inch wider than the finished amount so that I have space to flip and press the shade. Once I've got it all measured out, I cut my drapery. I use a crap ton of pins, so lay your drapery fabric on top of your curtain panel fabric facing up and use your pins. You want to double check that you're starting at the right point because it really sucks to sew it all together and realize you're 1/2 inch off. Pin your drapery fabric smoothly onto your drapery panel and make sure that everything is on a straight edge. So you want to make sure it's ready to go. I sew down the sides, the vertical sides first. So I start on the right hand side, sew that one down. Once I get to the end, I flip the curtain upside down and then I sew the left hand side. I do that to make sure if there's any tension issues, I still have extra length so I can square off the top edges and get a nice straight top and bottom. So make sure you know where you're supposed to start on the print of the fabric. I like to use a little T-square or my quilting ruler to make sure everything is nice and straight, double checking the measurement yet again against your order. Then I'm going to go in with my T-square, check my length. I like to mark it 40 inches because my ruler is just a smidge shy. Then I sew my bottom and my top hem. The bottom hem goes all the way across. The top hem goes almost to the end, but that's where you're going to flip the shade. So leave yourself some space. Then I check my unflipped measurement one more time and my unflipped length. I give 3/8 of an inch extra on length. Once I check that it's good, I trim off the excess and I crop my corners at an angle. I flip my shade inside out and then I use my seam ripper just to make those corners nice and square so they're not pulled out. Then I bring my curtain on over to my ironing board. Flipping the corners can take a little bit. So I repeat that same process, measuring it and pinning it and making sure that I started in the right spot. So I like to iron my seams open and then I go back and then I press the shade completely flat. That gives me the closest edge. It does take a tiny bit more time, but it gives you a nicer finished product. I also find that the iron removes just about every single Frixion pen mark I've ever made. Sometimes I have to go over it twice, especially when I have to turn down the iron temperature. So press, and double check now that your corners are nice and square and everything matches. Take your cord case fabric. I like to use 2.5 inch wide lengths and I batch sew them all in one go and then I set them aside in groups of 2 or 3 per shade so I know that I've got it. My seam allowance on this is about 1 inch, so I put my presser foot on the edge and I just zip through. I trim the ends apart and I knot them together. Double check for your shade length and dowel placement in the spreadsheet that's going to be shared with you, and you punch in your shade length and you go to the first green column and those are your markings. So taking your nice squared flat shade, I put it on the top of my panel, on my table, and then I mark all my dowel lengths and then I use my T-square and my Frixion pen to draw my sewing line, which I'm going to pin my cord casings to and I'm going to pin together so my fabric doesn't bend or wander. I lay my cord casing down at the top dowel line and pull it all the way to the edge of the shade, and then I measure out how much cord I need. I do like, 2 times the length of the shade for the shorter pull, and then the width plus 2 times the length of the shade for the longer one. I like to knot the longer cord so I know which one is longer. Now you're going to trim your cord cases so they're not too long and stitch the cord onto the cord case itself. Then take your nice softened edge dowel and you're going to flip the cord cases inside out, just going smoothly so you don't ram your dowel through the cord case or through your seam. Once it's flipped, I like to knot the excess cord so I don't have a giant mess, but also tug on the cord to make sure the ends are secure. To iron the cord cases, make sure you turn your iron down low, otherwise you can melt them. I press them flat because it's easier to sew and know where my cord actually is. I pin it about 2 to 2.5 inches from the edge on my shade, and then I put the cord cases down onto the marked drapery panel, and I put 1 pin and I stagger the pin so the edges of the pin are on either side of the cord so it doesn't wander, and I know where to make my sewing line stop and start. And double check that your left pull cord or your right pull cord is on the right side. You've got to make sure your thread that you're using to sew the sewing lines for the dowels matches. So just do a quick test on scrap fabric, and then you're going to go through and you are going to sew all of your dowel lines. And like I said, for the bottom one, you sew right over that cord case, but for all the others, you need to leave a gap so that you can pull on the cord and the shade will pull up. This does take a little bit of time because you want to make sure that your thread isn't knotting, you're not having any problems with your sewing machine, and you're not having any bunching problems. So use a ton of pins, use more than you think. Sometimes halfway through, if the fabric is bunching too much under my sewing machine throat, I just flip it around and go back the other direction. Then once I've got the sewing lines for the dowels all the way done, I cut and pin my Velcro onto the top of my shade, and then I just go through and I stitch 2 lines for the Velcro. The first line I like to stitch about 1/8 to 1/4 inch from the top. The second line goes about 1/16 of an inch in from the edge of the Velcro. And back to the iron, you've got to get all those Frixion pen marks off. So if you're using a blackout fabric, make sure you iron from the front so you aren't melting anything. If you need to, also going over the cord cases. Take a few minutes, trim all your loose threads, trim your jump cords, and then go up the side of the shade and pop open the seam just a couple stitches right above the dowel line so that you can go back in, put your dowels in, and then you're going to hand sew those edges closed. And of course, make sure that this thread you're using matches the curtain panel. One of the last steps that you're going to need to do is do a securing stitch for each of the dowels. So what you're going to do is go underneath the cord casing so it's hidden, pull your thread all the way through, come back as close as you can right to the edge, make sure your loop is smooth on the other side, and it's a little fussy. I like to slip my needle underneath just the top layer. Then I wrap my thread around, 2 or 3 times. And this is the part I never quite get right. You want to make sure the knot pulls out, or you make a knot and it's nice and smooth, and sometimes I just turn it into a giant knot at the base. So then you just have to fix it and cut off all the extra thread, which, probably, I don't know. In my head, it's what like fly tying looks like. So I just totally screwed that up. All the other ones I've done off camera have been great. Not that one. Pretty typical. Tie a new knot and repeat it. You don't have to do a stitch for the very bottom and the very top dowels, but you need to do them for all the other dowels. Of course, that one went much better. So I like to do it a couple times, double check, and then make sure that your dowel stays in place, because sometimes you can do a knot but you've only got it through the back layer, not through the front of the curtain, and that's not great either. And obviously you got to make sure you move your dowel all the way down to the bottom. I probably put the stitch in about, I don't know, 1.5 inches, an inch from the bottom edge of the stitching line that I've done. Okay, so that's 3. Now I need more thread. So with your thread, you want to use the same color that you did for your top stitching, or the most invisible, looking thread that you can, because you are sewing on the front of the shade, and you want this stitch to be super small so it just disappears. And you do it under the cord casing, that way your customers don't see it. I do use like double thread instead of single layer thread, just because I want it just to be a little bit sturdier. Mounting your curtain onto the block. So you're going to have obviously your blocks from the hardware store. You've got your finished shade ready to go. You want to make sure you give the cords a test. I like to just hold my hand at the corner, pull all the way up to make sure that the curtain pleats up. Because sometimes you might not have stitched the bottom carefully and that could pop out. So once you've done that, this part's loud. I have a Boss Stitch electric staple gun. It was about $45. The thing has been such a workhorse, totally amazing. My hand was cramping when I was doing manual. Then you're gonna have your little hook and eye hooks. So they're these little guys. If the shade is under 20 inches, I just use 2 of these. Otherwise, I use 3. And then you're going to have 1 screw to secure. Now, with shades that are over 40 inches wide, you're going to have 3 cord locks. Otherwise, you have 2. You need 1 of these for each cord case that you have. I said cord locks on the first thing, didn't I? You also need 1 pony bead per little cord thingamajiggers. You also need your warning labels. These are the cord locks. That's all our hardware. We're just gonna quickly cut some fabric. Okay, so the piece of fabric you're going to need is about 3 inches too long for your block on either side and about 6 inches wide. So obviously you want to make sure that you're using the same fabric that you're using for the rest of the curtain. If you run out of fabric at the end and you have to use vertical scraps, you can do that. Or sometimes, like with this one, the pattern kind of doesn't matter. It's going to look pretty close. Obviously, if you have horizontal or vertical stripes, with stripes I would try and make sure you're going in the same direction as your shade. You're going to want to center your pattern on your block, fold over each end, then you staple about 1.5 inches in, give it a tug, give it another staple, then you kind of like wrapping a present, trim your corners. This one's a little too wide. I don't measure it, I just eyeball it. The others are a little better. So then I start with the side that's closest to me first, and I pull this tight and I secure it with a staple, go to the other side. So if you have excess overhang, just go through on this one, trim it off so it doesn't make too bulky a fabric. Now, the one thing I'll say, sometimes you'll get a curtain where honestly it feels more like you're putting together a blanket as a curtain. If it's really thick, if it has really heavy yarn, it might be better just to make the block with drapery fabric, just because it's going to be so hard to get your eye hooks in, and it makes for so much extra bulk on the mounting block. So I folded under the extra so I have a nice finished edge on the block itself. I pull it tight and then just do staple, staple, staple all the way down. Now, you have to make sure on your instructions you know whether you're doing narrow mounting block or, narrow mounting block means you're putting your Velcro on here so it's hung up against the wall this side, or if you're doing it this way, that's regular. So that's going to be something you look for. So grab your sticky back Velcro, not the sewing kind. Measure just the length of your block. Don't use your fabric scissors, but you know that. Trim off, and then I start at the left end, and now our Velcro is like almost a smidge wider than our mounting blocks. If you cut the Velcro too long, don't undo the paper all the way because then your scissors will get sticky, and just make sure it's nice and secured. Now, I do 3 staples at the end just to secure it. Then I go up and down along the block. Then I do a couple in the middle because I want the Velcro to be super secure. Now you're going to attach it to the shade. So I did double check my instructions. This is a regular mount. I also put the side with my staples facing in so the customer does not see that. So when I go to assemble, the stapled side is facing me. Then I pull my curtain up where the Velcro is, and I give it good press just to make sure that my curtain is thoroughly secured to the Velcro. Okay. This curtain is different because it is a left mount. So I'm going to show you a left mount and a right mount. We'll hide that for a sec. Okay, so for the left mount, the cord is going to be mounted on the left side because that's where the cord pull is shorter. And this usually messes me up. Okay, so, yep. All right, so these on the cord lock, there's this little part, and then there's the 2 bits that stick out. The 2 bits that stick out face the edge. So you pull the cord up. Now on these shades, I put up about 2.5 inches. I take a drill, and I go halfway up, halfway down, and you're aiming for the middle. If you by chance happen to hit the part where you stapled, oops, back it out, do it again. And, okay, so you've got your 3 screws, 3 eye hooks, and your little screw. So then you are going to start securing your eye hook because your cord casings run through that eye hook. I put my screwdriver in and spin it around because twisting it was too hard for my hands, and using pliers scratched up the eye hook. Make sure that your eye hook ends up, more or less parallel. So I knot the cords so they don't get in my way until this part. Then I take a pin I weave it through the cord itself. I go in the hole. I mean, this part honestly, you can do the cord itself, but here's where you need the pin. You're going in between the 2 gold sections of the cord lock. So here's the cord lock. Yeah, it's not really focusing. Okay, there's the cord lock. Your pin has to go in between the 2 where there's a space. It totally works. You just have to fiddle with it. And I feed it up through the middle of those 2. Now, if you have a super wide shade, you might have to do like left and right. Otherwise, I've just been going up through the middle. So I've drilled all my other holes. I spin with my screwdriver. Oh, I forgot to do this, that screw. Hang on. We'll do that too. I start them with my fingers. Occasionally some of your eye hooks have like a little metal burr on the end. And if you're trying and trying and trying and you just can't get it to start the hole, that's probably just a dud eye hook. Okay, the little screw, short, fat, round guy, that goes on the second hole of the cord lock. So this one, this is the fun part when you're almost done. And again, this is for left mount. You'll see why I say left mount. Then you just thread the second cord through the eye hook, through the bottom of the hole, out the other side. Now, because I had you tie a knot so you knew which was your longer, I do one knot for, if it's just a 2-cord shade, I do one side, the long side has, or the knot in it, the short side doesn't. So I weave that back through, after you've untied your knot, and go back up through the middle, and pull your pin back out. Now you're going to test your shade to make sure you didn't do anything goofy. Okay, so you can see that it looks like a right hand mount, but that's because it's facing me. So pull it up, make sure everything, you pull it up and lock it, make sure everything pleats nicely, and this is the way it's going to hang on the person's wall. So your cord is on the left hand side when you're facing it that way. So I unroll it back down. The last step, since you're making these to match, you want to roughly get your cord length to match as well. I typically take it to just below the last couple. I trim off both ends when the cord is flat and nothing is bunched. Then I do, like, I leave myself a tail, then I loop, tie this in a knot so it doesn't get tangled while it's shipping. So now I've got these 2 long pieces. I take my little guys here, 2 pony beads, and you know, industry says we have to give them a warning label, which I'm sure rips off really quickly. Put the cord thingamajiggers in there, the cover. Put your pony bead in. I loop 3 times through the hole, pull it tight, and then to secure it, I go back 3 more times, and then I go back 1 more time. Ridiculous amount of knots. But also make sure, sometimes I'll just add another knot if I started too soon and my tail is not hidden. So now my tail is just about hidden. If you needed to, you could trim the end, but I don't want this thing to fall off, so I'm just going to do 1 more knot. I suppose we could get fancy and melt it or something, but I don't usually do that. So put it in about 2.5 inches. 1, 2, 3. Pull it tight. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2. Okay, so you've got this great big honking knot. Okay, last step, rolling it up. So as I am doing the final roll up, I am checking for loose threads, any of my ends that did not get properly taken care of. And you're also making sure you cut your jump threads. Those ends are flush. Also check for any friction. So here's one I missed. So I go back in, I just trim that. So you got to be careful when you do this, obviously, because you don't want to go through all the work and then nick your curtain. And I have cats, so sometimes I will, if my cats have come to visit me in the basement, I also have to take out the packing tape and clean off cat fur. I'm not the person to do a curtain order if someone is extremely allergic, because even though my cats are not down in the workspace much, they're still cat fur. So, all right, once you've got this all up, plastic. So I take my plastic, I do it about 4 or 5 inches too long for my shade. I do 1 curtain per bag because it's easier, and you know, our curtains vary in bulk. This one's a really thin curtain because the customer's fabric that they chose is such a thin cotton. Okay, so I twist the end of the bag, shove it in the down below, and secure it with tape. Okay. Then you don't want to create an air bubble. So I've also shoved the cord and and if I had any hardware, I also stuff it in there. So if your cord says outside mount, I like to tape my baggie of hardware in the inside. I twist up the other end, make sure the plastic isn't a big bubble, and then it is ready to ship, and it is secure in case something soaks through the outside of the box. Hopefully that doesn't happen to anybody. Most of your shades are going to be normal right hand mount, or right side pull. What are we calling that? I forget. So halfway down, halfway up, get this in the middle. Your cord lock's going to be in the middle, so loop side right there. When you start that, push it in, and then twist the screwdriver just to make that easier, so you can get it to go around. Okay, feed cord through the middle. Then going back up and in. Okay, cords to get started. All right, so test your shade. So this time it's on the opposite side. I hike it up, make sure it'll shut. I do it a couple times. Then I just bring my hand down to measure off the cords, make sure they're even, trim it, and finish off and wrap the shade. You might encounter a situation, our boxes are 48 inches long. Our shades are not all 48 inches long. So typically you're going to end up having to trim your box. So we've got here 22.5-inch shade, and I am going to make my box, I don't know, that looks good. So I got a cutting mat out below. I have my big old knife. I grabbed a nice straight edge. Keep your curtain off to the side so you don't inadvertently cut it with your mat knife, because then you'd really hate your life. I save these. Sometimes I can use them to Frankenstein a box together. This is a 6x6 box. I just make it so it's kind of straight. And then I like to fold one end to make the box cooperate. They often do not wish to do so. Okay. Roll up your curtain nice and tight, because then you just pick it up, slide it in the box. You want to double check your packing list, make sure if you needed hardware, now is the time to make sure it's in there. My box is too long. So then I go through, and about 1 inch away from my curtain on the inside of the packed box, I take my mat knife and I'm cutting flaps so that I can pick up the box. This is never quite as pretty as I would like it to be. You're just gonna tape your box together. Okay, so I probably use too much tape in general, but I'd rather have too much tape on the end of my box to make sure anything I overcut is sealed. So like here, I cut a little further than I used, so I just tape that up. All right, it's a good idea to know how long your box is. Now we need to weigh it. Make sure you have a postal scale. Zero it out. Mine is 4 pounds, 10.7 ounces, but you have to round up, so 4 pounds, 11. And now we're ready to go print a label.